So, hi, good evening, everyone. So, I welcome you all to this session integrated between two, so much different subjects, orthopedic and pediatrics, and that too for a topic which is usually least learned in both the departments, right? So, today we are going to discuss one of the most, or what you can say, the skip topic from ortho or from pediatrics, the muscular dystrophy. We have got a case, and through that case, we'll try to discuss all the important features about this particular condition that you might often found in your pediatrics as well as in your orthopedic OPD. Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much, sir. A very good evening to all the students. It's a privilege to be with Dr. Sushil. This is a topic, muscular dystrophy, which is enigmatic for all pediatricians because of our very little knowledge about orthopedics directly. So it's a privilege to be here with him and discuss this case. There is so much of the things that you can learn from him, and there are surely a few things that I can also learn because we all often get these type of disorders, and it's always important to know the salient features of these disorders and how to differentiate it from other similar looking disorders. So let us start with the case. So this is a case of a 7-year-old boy. In fact, this is a case which is a very closely related case to what we saw about 3 months back in our OPD. The child was a 7-year-old child, a boy. A very important thing is the gender of the child. The child was a boy. The child came to our pediatric OPD with a progressive muscle weakness and frequent falls while walking and running. So there was a history of progressive muscle weakness, which is a very important history in a boy and can be one of the leading histories that can start indicating a possible cause of the disorder. The mother complained that the child had been frequently falling while walking and running since the child was 3 to 4 years of age. So this child right now was 7 years, and since the last 3 to 4 years, according to the mother, most children they start walking by the age of about 15 months. So by 13 to 15 months, children can walk without support. So after initial 5 6 months, according to the mother, the child started tripping over frequently while walking, and according to her, the parents neglected this issue initially, but soon the problem became very concerning for them as the child started suffering from frequent injuries due to falls. And that was the time when they started thinking that they need a reference for this or opinion for this problem. So the child had been having these frequent injuries. And another very important history that the parents gave was that they observed that the child was very reluctant to climb the stairs. So whenever, according to the history that we actually took from the parents, the child's aunt house was on the second floor. So the child was always very reluctant to go to the aunt's house. And when the child was probed and asked by the parents, the child then told that he had difficulty in climbing stairs, which the parent had been neglecting. There was no muscle pain, which was associated with these findings. Now, when we examined the child, and this is a very basic pediatric examination that we can do, this is appears to be a primary orthopedic case. But when we examined the child, one of the primary finding that we could actually see was that the child had a proximal muscle weakness. So there was a weakness of the hip muscles, and we observed the Gauer sign, which I'll tell you later. Dr. Sushil will be able to tell this much better. But there was an obvious proximal weakness of the way the child was walking, and there was a calf hypertrophy that was very clearly seen in this child. The child, when we asked him to walk from one side of the room to the other, the child walked in a typical duck-like gait, which you often call as the waddling gait. And that was something that very clearly showed that the child had a hip girdle muscle weakness. Uh, and in a 7-year-old child with a hip girdle muscle weakness, waddling gait, I think this was the time when we started thinking what can be the problem the child is having. Gava's sign was positive. Dr. Sushil will explain this much better. We asked the child to sit, and then we asked the child to stand from the sitting position. So the child had obvious difficulty in standing, and he had to climb up gradually by first using the floor, then using his legs, and he gradually climbed up, which showed a positive Gava's sign. Dr. Sushil will explain this much better.
Right.
Overall, the basic examination that we did, the muscle mass and the tone was normal. So there was no very obvious wasting that I could see while examining the child. And we very thoroughly did a thorough examination of all the cranial nerves. So there was no obvious cranial or peripheral neuropathy that we could get from the examination of the child. So this appeared to be a primary problem of the muscles.
Sir, here I would like to add one point.
Ji, sir.
Sir, the history that you are giving us, there is one very, very important point, and that is actually the pain of the muscle. There is no muscle pain.
Ji, sir.
Sir, I'll tell you and all the students who are viewing us that this condition that we are talking right now, we are going towards a condition which seems to be involving the muscles.
Okay.
But sometimes there is another condition which, differentials for this another condition which involve the muscle, the polymyositis.
Ji.
This is one thing. There is no muscle pain. That is a very, very important point that actually, differentiates polymyositis with the rest of the muscle dystrophies. This is one very important thing. Okay. Right, sir. We can proceed.
So after this basic history and examination, and to be very frank, as a pediatrician, when we have a child who had such type of findings, there were only 2-3 basic disorders that came to my mind. One thing, obviously, a child who is in his mid-childhood, about 6-7 years of age, with proximal muscle weakness, Gowers sign positive, calf hypertrophy. This very clearly indicated the child probably had Duchenne's muscle dystrophy, a dystrophinopathy. We could have thought of Becker's dystrophy also, which is less common in comparison to Duchenne's. But the rapidity with which the weakness had progressed, and by 7 years the child had started having these problems, Becker's has a much more gradual course, and therefore we thought DMD should be one of the first differential diagnoses. So to be very frank, the investigations that I started or asked for were primarily keeping in mind the diagnosis of Duchenne's muscle dystrophy. During the time of examination, there were 2-3 other differentials as a pediatrician that we thought of. Proximal muscle weakness, as Dr. Sushil said, polymyositis. Juvenile dermatomyositis is also something which is associated often with proximal muscle weakness, although occurs in a slightly older age. But juvenile dermatomyositis typically has a proximal muscle weakness. However, here there was no history of rashes. Rashes is a very important finding that we see there because it's an inflammatory condition. And plus the typical heliotropic rash that is seen around the eyes, which is very characteristic of this disorder, that was absent in this case. So juvenile dermatomyositis was ruled out. Also, there is a typical malar rash in juvenile dermatomyositis, a typical like SLE, so it was ruled out. Another thing that came to my mind, although it's not very common, is metabolic myopathies. We asked for any metabolic disorder that the child was having in the past. Mother was not aware of it. So again, there are certain rare metabolic disorders, especially glycogen storage disorders and mitochondrial myopathies, which can have findings primarily involving the muscles, especially I would say McArdle's disease and type 5 and type 6, which is Terrois disease, is known to have primary muscle involvement. Although Von Gerg's disease and other findings also, other types of glycogen storage disorders also are known to have muscle involvement, but there is often hepatic involvement also in those cases. We examined the liver of this child. There was no hepatomegaly in this child. Plus, there was no exercise intolerance like findings which are typically seen in glycogen storage disorders. So that again made us feel that glycogen storage disorder is unlikely in this child. Regarding mitochondrial myopathies, well, we have seen only 2 cases of mitochondrial myopathies in the past. What I know of is CNS findings are very frequently seen in these cases. We took a history of CNS findings. There was no CNS findings. Plus, I have not mentioned here, but we got an ophthalmological opinion also done. Retinitis pigmentosa, optic atrophies are findings which are seen in many of these mitochondrial myopathies. So I've not mentioned it here, but we did get an ophthalmological opinion done also, which was normal. Plus CNS findings like stroke. So we asked the mother whether he had any history of weakness in the past, hemiparesis in the past, or any history of strokes, which was not present. Memory, we checked. Dementias are commonly seen in these cases. Now, in this child's IQ did not appear to be affected. The child was going to school, although mild impairment of intelligence is a finding that is seen in many patients with Duchenne's dystrophy also. But there was no apparent IQ impairment that I could actually get from the parents' history. Overall, taking in mind that this appears to be a DMD only, we got a serum creatine kinase levels done, which are found to be 8,500. Now, again, Dr. Sushil will tell this better, but what we know is that creatine kinase findings or levels in DMDs are much higher than this. They go up to right up to 30 to 35,000.
Correct, sir.
So this is something which was a little lower than normal, but lower than what was expected. Sorry, not normal, but still, we got LDH, ALT, and AST also. Although these are not very non-specific markers, they are not very specific for the development of Duchenne's muscle dystrophy. But these markers are mentioned in books and they were found to be raised. So LDH was 500 micrograms per deciliter, which was up higher than the normal values. And alanine and aspartate transaminase were also increased. I was having a discussion with Dr. Sushil before this, and he was also of the opinion that these are not very specific markers for Duchenne's dystrophy. But anyway, books mentioned that these markers are raised in many of these patients. EMG was done, which was typically showed a myopathic pattern, which was expected also because myopathies normally are associated with proximal muscle weakness. It's neuropathies which primarily present with distal muscle weakness. So we expected a myopathic pattern on EMG. We got a muscle biopsy done also, and muscle biopsy showed the typical findings of a degenerative muscles, which is skeletal muscles were degenerated and they were replaced by fat tissues and extensive fibrin. So this is, although not a specific finding for DMD, this was a finding which is very characteristically seen in most cases of muscle dystrophies. So our finding was quite evident based upon these investigations that our patient had muscle dystrophy, a muscle dystrophy, rapidly progressing proximal muscle weakness, calf hypertrophy in a 7-year-old child. It was very clear the child has a Duchenne's muscle dystrophy. As is recommended in all cases of DMD, starting from the age of 10 years or when the symptoms appear, an echocardiogram should also be done because many of these children present with persistent tachycardias and myocardial fibrosis. So echocardiogram was done, but thankfully echocardiogram in this child was normal. So there was no finding that was seen in this case. So the diagnosis, as I told you, from our point of view was very clear. We took an orthopedic opinion also subsequently. We made a diagnosis of Duchenne's muscle dystrophy in this case. And this Duchenne's muscle dystrophy is one of the primary type of muscle dystrophies that is seen in this age group. I think now Dr. Sushil would be a much better learned person to tell us about muscle diseases and which are the diseases which present with these type of findings, what differential diagnosis we should keep, and what are the salient features of DMD. So Dr. Sushil.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So basically, sir, when we are talking about the muscle diseases as such, there are 5 to 6 conditions that we should keep in our mind. Though these conditions are not very, very common, but yes, as a part of differential diagnosis, like you said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'll just add on to what you already said. Okay, so most common, as we are discussing right now, these can be the case of muscular dystrophies, right? So you told that you were suspecting either Duchenne or Becker in this particular patient in the child, but Duchenne being more common, so our more focus goes on to Duchenne only. Second, it is myotonic dystrophy. Third, it can be metabolic diseases of the bones or of the muscles, sorry, not the bones, the polymyositis and dermatomyositis. Then myositis ossificans. Other one is the progressive fibrosis of the quadriceps and the myasthenia gravis. These are the differentials. These are the conditions which can affect the muscle diseases. And all of these patients, they can have more or less same feature like the conditions that we're discussing right now. But obviously, there are certain things which differentiate each one of them. Like you already emphasized, sir, that muscular dystrophies we are discussing right now, the metabolic diseases of the muscle, they are basically occurring because of imbalances between the calcium and other minerals in the muscles. Polymyositis, I said, it is one condition which will actually be somewhat painful and it won't be like the Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So what we can do, we can show some comparisons between some of these conditions so that our picture remains clear. If somehow we get a child in our ortho or the pediatric OPD, a student should be able to make out some differential out of these 5, 6, 7 conditions. They should come out to 1 or 2 or 3 like that. Okay, so sir, you can just start over it and I'll put my point of view, what we think as orthopedicians when a child comes to us with muscle dystrophy.
Ji. So muscle dystrophies usually are one of the common type of primary muscle diseases that are seen in children. Uh, they are usually differentiated from many myopathies or congenital myopathies by the fact that most of these congenital myopathies, which may develop from the time the child is born, but may slowly manifest with symptoms after 1 year of age. But myopathies usually overall are not progressive diseases. In contrast, one of the classical features of muscle dystrophies is that they are progressive in nature and they are primary muscular disorders. So they're not secondary to any problem. They are primary muscle disorders and have a progressive course. That's one of the major features. Although many of the congenital muscle dystrophies that we see, they actually are either very slowly progressive or they are actually non-progressive. But most other muscle dystrophies, facioscapulohumeral dystrophies, DMDs, they all are progressive muscle diseases. Then they have a hereditary pattern. For example, DMD is typically an X-linked recessive disorder. Similarly, myotonic muscle dystrophies, they actually are, although it doesn't classically fit under muscle dystrophies, but it's an autosomal dominant disease. Then facioscapulohumeral dystrophy, I think it's an autosomal recessive disorder. So these are disorders which typically have a hereditary pattern of inheritance. And most of these, at some point of the time, will be associated with degeneration and the death of the muscle fibers. So these muscle fibers will degenerate, will be replaced by fatty tissue, and that will be the primary finding that will be seen when muscle biopsies will be done in these patients. Some of the common type of muscle dystrophies are dystrophinopathies. Now, what are dystrophinopathies? Dystrophinopathies are those type of muscle dystrophies which involve abnormality in the dystrophin protein. And DMD and Becker's dystrophy are the classical examples of dystrophinopathies. In fact, they are the commonest type of primary muscle dystrophies that are seen in children. Emery-Dreifuss muscle dystrophy, well, this is not very commonly seen in children. In fact, I would say statistics show that overwhelmingly the majority of muscle dystrophy seen in children are likely to be DMDs. But Emery-Dreifuss muscle dystrophy, myotonic muscle dystrophy, uh, facioscapulohumeral dystrophies, and then congenital muscle dystrophies. These are some of the other type of muscle dystrophies that are seen. But overall, the most common type of muscle dystrophy that we encounter in children will be dystrophinopathies, that is DMD and Becker's.
So to add on to what you just said, that it is same thing that it is genetically determined. We have already mentioned it, and these are the progressive diseases of the skeletal system. Now, one thing I want to highlight here to all the students that there is no sign of inflammation in the muscles, which we have pointed out earlier in the very first slide also, that there is no inflammation. These are not inflammatory. So these are not inflammatory, and for the same reason, because they are not inflammatory, we don't call it a myositis. We considered them, that's why they are known as, so they are known as myopathies, and we never call it myositis. Like the polymyositis we were talking about, that is the reason why it is painful, because that is having some sort of inflammation going on. So these dystrophinopathies, they have got no sign of inflammation at all. They have got fibrosis, but that fibrosis is not because of any kind of inflammation like we traditionally read, that if there is an inflammatory process going on, if there is a trauma, some infective lesion, that infection will heal up with fibrosis, and that will call a contracture or some bulkiness of the thigh muscle, calf muscle, like that. There is no inflammation at all, and therefore we read these conditions under the head of myopathies. So there is not, these are not myositis. That is one thing I wanted to just clear to all the students,
Just
because
one question.
yes
Uh,
sir,
uh, Actually, polymyositis as a disorder is not classically mentioned in most of our pediatric books.
yes sir,
They use the term dermatomyositis, which is usually an inflammatory disorder. So, what I wanted to ask for my own knowledge also,
yes sir.
is polymyositis taken as a, because dermatomyositis also involves proximal muscle weakness. So, is
Yes.
polymyositis a part of dermatomyositis complex, or is it a
Sir,
separate disease?
sir, basically both the features for both of them, they will overlap. But there
Okay.
are certain differences that I've already mentioned here. I'll just show you in a while. So there are certain differences. So dermatomyositis and polymyositis, only muscle involvement and along with the skin manifestation, that is usually one big difference that we need. Though the conditions, the pictures for both the children, they will be overlapping. And both of them, they will be having pain. That is a common feature. That is one thing we see. So
Okay.
to simplify that, I have put one table over here. and I think that will be useful for everybody, each one of us. So it is after just one or two slides. I'll show you that.
Sure, sure.
Yeah. So this is one thing, sir, I wanted to convey here. And when you, yeah, yes, sir, you can start with the dystrophinopathies, then I'll mention it.
Okay, so our case was a case of Duchenne's muscle dystrophy. It's a type of a dystrophinopathy. So just a few words about Duchenne's muscle dystrophy and dystrophinopathy. See, dystrophinopathies, as I told you, is primarily an abnormality in the dystrophin gene, which codes for the dystrophin protein. So therefore, both the type of disorders which fit under this disorder, under this broad umbrella term dystrophinopathies, will be affecting the dystrophin gene. But how much of dystrophin protein is lacking is primarily what differentiate a DMD from a Becker's dystrophy. Now, the severity obviously of Duchenne's muscle dystrophy is much, much higher in comparison to Becker's dystrophy. Duchenne's muscle dystrophy is primarily an X-linked recessive disorder, and so is Becker's dystrophy also. Both of them are X-linked recessive disorders. And the primary problem that leads to Duchenne muscle dystrophy is a mutation. This mutation usually is either a deletion or a duplication, which occurs in the dystrophin gene located on the short arm of chromosome X, the XP21 location. So this location, when the mutation occurs in this dystrophin gene, the dystrophin protein is primarily affected. And Dr. Sushil will explain this better. What is the basic function of the dystrophin protein? We all know that dystrophin is an important part of the sarcolemma. So obviously, when this protein gets defective, the whole cytoskeletal complex, the integrity of the membrane of the muscles will be affected, and the muscles will start to degenerate. But I think Dr. Sushil will explain this better. What is this protein primarily and how it gets affected in dystrophinopathies?
The basic, this word dystrophinopathies, when anybody, any student, in fact, I as a student, when I used to read what is dystrophinopathy and what is then Duchenne, what is then Becker. So this is one very, very simple thing that each one of us has to understand. There are multiple proteins in the cell, in the muscle, in the bone. And like I teach in my orthopedic class also that the most common collagen, the most common protein present in the bones, it is type 1 collagen. For cartilage, it is type 2. So there are so many others also. So this dystrophin that we're talking again and again, the dystrophinopathy, it means a pathy, a problem related to what? The dystrophin. Now, what exactly is the dystrophin? So this dystrophin, sir, as you already mentioned, it is basically a protein, right? So I'll just tell you a brief, structure. The weight of the dystrophin, it is a 400 kilodalton. Just as an interesting fact, I'm telling there is no relation that anybody has to remember it. So I'm just telling you, just for the sake that people might like to know what exactly it is. So it is a 400 kilodalton protein that is the which actually is present everywhere. When you say that it is a component of sarcolemma, it is a component which helps muscle membrane in some way to maintain its integrity. This dystrophin protein is present in all the kind of muscle, whether it is a smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, skeletal muscle, or in fact in the brain. So I'll just write it down that it is present in the skeletal muscle, it is present in the smooth muscles, in the muscles of the heart, or in the muscles of the brain, so cardiac muscles or the brain. So it is present everywhere. Now, this dystrophin, what it helps, it maintains the cells, the cell membrane basically, the cytoskeleton, to maintain its integrity. Whenever the dystrophin protein is either defective, it is not formed properly, so cell membranes they start getting, they rupture. So because of that, rupturing the muscle integrity, the strength cannot be maintained. And because of that, with minimal force, wherever in the body, for example, when somebody takes the example of the tendon Achilles, it is attached on the posterior side of calcaneum. So tendon Achilles, whenever you try to move, whenever anybody tries to move, any muscle which contracts and tries to deform the joint. So whenever I'm walking, my hand has the foot has to go like this, down and up. So tendon Achilles is, having a pull on the rest of the ankle to move it down in the plantar flexion, going down. Whenever there is no integrity of these cells, these muscles they get easily damaged. The cells rupture, and therefore the gastrosoleus, the ankle area, is the first joint to get involved. That I'll just tell gradually. So this is the relation of this dystrophin, and the problem with the dystrophin is the reason why we call the Duchenne and the Becker these two muscular dystrophies as dystrophinopathies. Whether it is Duchenne or Becker, in both of them, the problem, the defect lies with this protein, which is dystrophin. That is one thing I wanted to convey. So this being it is present everywhere, that is the reason why. every area, every region of the body is affected, whether it is heart, whether it is brain, or any of the other muscles as well. Sir, one thing, just you have already said, it is about the dystrophin gene, the XP21. One important point I want to highlight, other than the Duchenne and Becker, this dystrophin gene is not at all defective in any of the muscular dystrophy, whether it is any of the four that you mentioned, right? So that is why only these two have been considered under this DMD and Becker's. The rest of them, they have got other reasons why they affect the muscles, proximal or distal, but not related to the dystrophin protein. So, like one example I want to highlight here, sir, one dystrophy that you mentioned was Emery-Dreifuss. So, in Emery-Dreifuss, what happens? Why we call it a Emery-Dreifuss syndrome? It is because the protein which is affected in Emery-Dreifuss, it is Emery. The amarin is absent, and because of this absence of this amarin, this has been named as Emery-Dreifuss syndrome. That is one important fact that I wanted to tell. Pathologically, when we see the muscle, when you think like sir has already sent the sample of this child, then pathologically we see these muscles. What we are able to say is there will be loss of the muscle fibers, right? There will be, these are caused by basically between because of the cellular lysis, because they are not able to maintain the cell integrity. There will be patchy necrosis, some necrosis here, some here, some here. So there will be patchy necrosis, and because of this necrosis, because of the rupture of the cell, there will be finally fragmentation and fibrosis of these muscles. And wherever the fibrous bulk get collected, it seems like that the muscle has got hypertrophy. That is what sir has already mentioned, that this child was also having some thickening of the calf area, pseudo hypertrophy. That is the reason. So cellular integrity hampered, lysis, fragmentation of the muscle fiber, necrosis, and then finally this is death, the fibrosis, and accumulation of that fibrostic muscle is what we call pseudo hypertrophy. That is what I wanted to say, highlight. Sir, when you talk about, I can just tell a few interesting points how DMD, the muscle dystrophies, they were started. So, muscle dystrophy, basically, in our pediatric books, in our orthopedic pediatric books, we find the mention as, back, it is not very old, these dystrophies. The first instance that we find in our orthopedic pediatric book, it is coming from 1852 only. So, it is not very, very old, these muscular dystrophies. And the first person who actually focused onto these kind of diseases was Meron. Meron was the first fellow who identified, who tried to understand that there is something wrong with the muscle. But actually, he was not able to differentiate whether the nervous system is also involved or not. So he is not given much of the credit for his work. But then in the year 1868, Duquesne was the person, the Duquesne muscular dystrophy, why it is known as DMD. It was found by Duquesne. It was diagnosed by Duquesne. So Duquesne in the year 1868, what he said, that he found a family, and in the family the children, the boys, they were usually affected. And what he just saw that in front of him, those children, they started having the weakness of the lower limb muscles. And that lower limb weakness, they basically involved first of all the lower limb muscles, then the trunk muscles, then the upper limb muscles. And he was, kind enough or intelligent enough to analyze that there is no change in the nervous system, only the muscles are affected. And that's how we got the name of this muscular dystrophy as Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Now, another fellow, the Gower-Stein that you were mentioning, sir, Gower-Stein. Gower was again a fellow. And Gower in year 1879, what he described, that he described another form of the muscular weakness, which instead of involving the proximal muscle, that was involving the distal muscle. And Gower was the person who analyzed that whenever the child is trying to get up from the ground, either he is taking the support of the ground. When he is somewhat in a standing position, he takes the help of his leg, then thigh, and then holding the body, taking some help from the parts of the body, he has to get up. Muscles are so weak. And that's how we got this name, the Gower sign. So, describe these all other myopathies, the Emery or the facioscapulohumeral. These were all described later in the year 1800 only. But this is how the history goes back. So Duquesne was the person who identified, and he definitely was the one to differentiate that it is not affecting the nervous system. It is only affecting the muscles, musculoskeletal system. Only the muscle are being affected. So that's how he got all the credit for finding these dystrophies. That is what I wanted to tell all the students, all the viewers for watching it. You can carry on with the case, sir.
So, dystrophinopathies, I won't go into too much of a detail. Dystrophinopathies, as I told you, primarily involve the dystrophin protein. We'll primarily talk about Duchenne muscle dystrophy. Now, this is an X-linked recessive disorder, so boys are primarily affected. Girls usually are always the carriers. But when I say always the carriers, that means there are just about 8 to 10% cases where girls may also manifest symptoms. And one of the classical explanation that has been given, why should a girl manifest symptoms in this condition, considering that's an X-linked recessive disorder? So the primary reason that has been given is the Lyons hypothesis. So in Lyons hypothesis, what happens is the normal X chromosome will get inactivated while the other X chromosome may be having the mutant gene. So that is why the girl will start showing the symptoms. But as far as we know, even when a girl does show symptoms of DMD, it is not as severe as seen in most boys. So please remember, although boys are primarily affected in comparison to the girls, you should not always rule out that when a girl presents with symptoms of classical of DMD, you should not always close your eyes and say, no, it cannot happen in girls. So it can happen in girls. Another case scenario where it can happen in girls is Turner syndrome. So Turner syndrome, is XO. So if that single X chromosome has this mutant allele, then obviously again, the girl can get affected. So, I mean, this line is just to tell you the fact that don't always close your eyes and say, okay, we have always learned classically that DMD affects boys, so girls can never be affected. Girls can be affected, but obviously much less in comparison to the boys. Now, without going to too much of detail, most of the cases of DMDs, they usually appear normal when the child is born. Facial features usually are not much affected. And this actually is a very important difference from many other types of dystrophies. For example, facioscapulohumeral dystrophies, the facial involvement and the shoulder girdle involvement is a very early feature of the disease. So they have a typical puckered, round puckered mouth, which can be seen in as young as infants. Similarly, myotonic dystrophies, they again have facial weakness, which can be manifested early. But in cases of DMDs, most of these children do not have facial involvement. So they will appear absolutely normal. And in our case also, the mother said till the time the child started walking, the child was absolutely fine. It is suddenly from the age of about say 2 to 3 years. This is what our books say, from the age of about 2 to 3 years, that the problem usually will start manifesting. So from 2 to 3 years, the typical history the mother will say is that when my child walks, he falls down. And I've seen majority of mothers till now, I might have seen around 8-10 cases of DMDs. In most of these cases, please realize the mother often is not able to tell the problems till the child is about 5 years of age, because mothers often neglect these problems considering that the child is learning to walk now. So if he's falling again and again, this is likely to be a problem. This is likely to be a normal phenomenon, nothing related to a disease. So this diagnosis is often missed at least in the first 5 years of age. In our case also, the child was brought to us when he was 7 years of age. So that's a very important thing. Diagnosis is often missed early. Gowers sign, Dr. Sushil will explain this better, which is a typical sign which indicates proximal muscle weakness in the child. Progressive proximal muscle weakness and calf muscle hypertrophy. Now, this calf muscle hypertrophy is a very important feature of DMD. And this primarily is because of fat infiltration and collagen proliferation in the calf muscles. Again, Dr. Sushil will explain this better. From our point of view, pediatric point of view, we have seen, I had this opportunity of seeing around 4 years back, I think, a patient who came to us for the first time, presented to us with sleep apneas. Now, respiratory muscle involvement is a very frequent finding that is seen in these cases. The patient who had come to us was around 8 years of age at that time, and the mother gave the history that the child actually is having headaches whenever he gets up in the morning because he is not able to get a good night's sleep. And this reason probably is because of the respiratory muscle weakness that these children gradually start developing, and which actually leads to sleep disordered breathing, sleep apneas, headaches in the morning, fatigue in the morning. So you need to have a very high degree of suspicion when you are watching this disease, because not all children will be presenting to you immediately at the age of around 4 to 5 years with weakness. The child may present to you with vague symptoms such as respiratory muscle weakness. Because of the respiratory muscle weakness, these children often have weak cough reflexes, pneumonias, chest infections are very commonly seen in these cases. In fact, recurrent pneumonias, aspirations are causes of deaths also, which can happen. While sleep, many of these children can die. And this is a very important thing that you need to remember when you are managing these cases. Then the spinal abnormalities like kyphoscoliotic changes, contractures, they often develops in these cases. And contractures again is a very important feature of this disorder, again, which Dr. Sushil will tell better. Now, from a pediatric point of view, cardiomyopathy, as Dr. Sushil just now told you, dystrophin is a very ubiquitous protein which is present everywhere, including the cardiac muscle. So it's very obvious to expect cardiac involvement to be present in DMD. What recommendations are that for cardiomyopathies, you need to do regular echocardiograms in these cases. We normally recommend an alternate year echocardiogram. That means every alternate year you need to do echocardiograms till the age of 10 years in the child. And after the child has completed the age of 10 years, then every year echocardiogram should be done. Most of these echocardiograms should be done as preemptive echocardiograms to diagnose the disease early. It's very important to do regular echocardiograms. In our patient, echocardiogram was normal, but it does not mean that echocardiogram will always remain normal. You may go into for an echocardiogram early also if the child manifests symptoms early. These children often have persistent tachycardias. They often present with myocardial fibrosis. So very important that you do an echocardiogram. Now, a major difference between DMD and Becker's dystrophy in terms of cardiomyopathy is that in DMD, the progression of cardiomyopathy usually starts becoming more severe. So it develops, the progression of cardiomyopathy develops after the child has become independently non-ambulatory. That means he's now no longer able to walk. Then the findings of cardiomyopathy start to become worse. But in the case of Becker's dystrophy, the findings of progression of cardiomyopathy are known to develop much earlier. The reason being that most of children of Becker's dystrophy, when they are walking, they are ambulatory till almost around 20, 25 years of age. So because they are walking at that time, shortness of breath, heart failures, they are known to develop much earlier in comparison to DMDs. So this can be an MCQ for you also, which you should remember for your exams. Most of the manifestations of Becker's dystrophy, especially the skeletal muscle manifestations, are later in comparison to DMDs. DMDs develops manifestations more earlier, and they also have much more severe illness compared to Becker's. But in Becker's, the progression of cardiomyopathy is at an earlier age in comparison to DMDs. DMD's progression of cardiomyopathies is only after the child becomes non-ambulatory, but in Becker's, it develops at an earlier age when the child is still ambulatory. Regarding the intelligence quotient, I have seen many times this question asked, and please be very careful about this question. IQ is impaired in DMDs, in dystrophinopathies, but please remember majority of patients who have reduced IQs only have mild to moderate impairment. Severe impairment of IQ is never seen or is very rarely seen in cases of dystrophinopathies. You can see written on the slide, mild reduced IQ functions. Only 20 to 30% patients have IQ below 70. Remaining always have IQ which is in the lower side of normal. So never think that severe mental impairment is a feature of dystrophinopathies. There have been some patients who have presented with seizures also, but association of seizures with DMD is not a very classical finding. So while IQ is affected, while intelligence quotient is affected, it is not very severely impaired in children with DMDs. And most of these children become non-ambulatory by 10 to 13 years of age, while in Becker's dystrophy, many times till the second decade of life, the child keeps, the child obviously has become a person by that time, the person will be ambulatory. So that's a major finding again, how DMD is different from Becker's. DMD, most of these children become non-ambulatory by 10 to 13 years of age, but in Becker's dystrophy, the weakness usually is very slowly progressive, and most of these cases by the second decade of life also are ambulatory. And deaths in most cases of dystrophinopathies occurs in the very early 20s, either in between 15 to 20 years of age or in early 20s. Over to you, sir. This, I think, Gauger sign, you are the best person, sir, to tell what exactly is the Gauger sign.
Yeah. So in the Gover sign, what actually happens? We have been talking about different these dystrophinopathies and the muscular dystrophies affecting the muscle, proximal muscle or the distal muscles. Now, what happens here? When the child tries to get up from the ground, he has to first take the support of the ground because these muscles are not at all helping him to get up from the ground. When he is into onto the middle phase of trying to get up, he has to take support of the leg or keeping the hand on the thigh so that he can have a hold onto the quadriceps, the lower thigh area, and then he has to get up like this. So taking support from the ground, from the legs, from the thigh is what we call as the Gover sign. This now you can see that this is a thickening. You can all observe there is a thickening of the calf muscles over here. This condition is what we call pseudo hypertrophy. Why pseudo hypertrophy? There is no muscular bulge or there is no increase in the muscle bulk. No, it is not like that. That's why we call it a pseudo hypertrophy. But still the muscles sorry but still the muscle seems to be thin. Why it is happening? Sir has already explained that the end result is fibrosis. But why it all started? Again the same thing, the basic concept. Dystrophin is lacking, cell membranes are not able to maintain the integrity, cell membrane ruptures, there will be localized multiple patchy necrosis multiple places, and because of these necrotic areas the muscle get into permanent death, permanent damage, and that heals by fibrosis. So not inflammatory, it is all because of the lack of the strength. And that's how the calf muscles, because all the time this is one of the bulk which helps you to get up, which helps you to walk. And the ankle area being the commonest, when you have to walk the ankle has to move and up and down. So ankle is the first joint which is usually showing you the symptoms, and therefore this gastrosoleus muscle, which is attached like this tendo Achilles, the gastrosoleus here, gastrocnemius and soleus bulk. So that's why the reason it gets start getting damaged and multiple areas of necrosis, fibrosis, and that causes accumulation of the bulk over here. That is the reason we call it pseudo hypertrophy. That's what we call Gover's and pseudo hypertrophy of the dystrophinopathy. Okay. So this is one important thing which I'm telling you again and again, that first type of this Duchenne muscular dystrophy, it is ankle. And ankle goes into equinus. You all know equinus is going down. And again, the same thing. The muscle is getting contracted, fibrotic. It is getting into the state of death. Initially, the contracture, it involves the gastrosoleus, the gastrocnemius and the soleus muscle. And these muscle bellies, they are getting enlarged. I told you that why we call it a pseudo hypertrophy. Other important thing, when it goes up, the proximal muscle involvement, it causes involvement of the hip abductor muscle, which goes into weakness. The abductors, which are the main abductors? The medius and the medius muscle, minimus muscle, right? And if everybody remembers what we learn in our regular classroom teaching for these abductor mechanism, how to test the abductor mechanism of any child, do you recall that? That is by Trendelenburg sign. Remember this Trendelenburg sign. So what was that Trendelenburg sign? Just to revise very, very quickly. When you ask the patient to stand on right side, if there is a problem on the right side abductor mechanism, the left side of pelvis will drop down. Isn't it? He won't be able to hold the other pelvis at the same level. Why it is happening? It is because of abductor muscle weakness. And that's what we call a Trendelenburg sign. And in the very, very first slide, sir clearly mentioned the case he got in his OPD. How he was walking? He was having a duck gait, the waddling gait. Why would somebody waddle? Waddle means moving like this and this swing. Why? Because to clear the ground, he has to sway his leg. He cannot elevate the pelvis and move forward. Instead, he has to drag the pelvis, or he has to, sway the pelvis like this. So all the time, he's shifting the weight of the body to the side on which he's standing like this. He sways this leg and then he sways other leg. That's what we call a waddling gait. So this is the reason why the child will have a waddling gait, not a Trendelenburg gait, because both the sides there will be muscular weakness, right? So both the sides Trendelenburg test will be positive. Muscular weakness is there on both the sides. It's not a nerve injury, not a superior gluteal nerve injury, not a single side muscle involvement, but it's a muscle weakness. Hip abductors are weak. So Trendelenburg sign, you all know, is a MCQ for our exam purpose also, right? When you talk about the Govers, I have explained to you that how this Govers is there. It is all because of the muscular weakness, all from the upper limb to the lower limb. One special thing I would like to tell you in upper limb is something known as the Meron sign. What is this Meron sign? When you try to hold on, this bit I have taken from Google only, because honestly speaking, I didn't had any patient of TMD in my OPD, but sir is lucky to have 6, 7 patients, as he mentioned. So when you try to hold on these children from their chest area, when you put your hands here in the chest area, axillary area, what will happen because of the muscular weakness? When you hold, the child is also putting some pressure, so that the child is in your arms only. But because of the weakness, what will happen? This child will fall down between these two hands of the examiner. The child will fall down because of muscular weakness. You hold him from here, and they just fall down. That is what you call a Meron sign, right? So examiner tries to hold on to the child by the chest. Abduction happens. The child is also putting some pressure, so he's in your lap, in your arms. But these children, because of muscular weakness, they just fall down from in between the two hands. That is Meron sign, right? One
Sir,
other
it's
important,
just one question. Sir, is
yeah,
the shoulder girdle weakness known to develop earlier in comparison to the hip girdle weakness or around the same time?
so it is usually the hip which comes first.
First.
After that, it involves the shoulder. Then another important test that we usually read in our class, that's a part of our PGME examination also, is something known as Ober's test. We talked about the abductor weakness. And then when you have the abduction contracture of the hip, the contracture is happening. Then what happens is, what we do to test these contracture is an Ober test. Ask the patient to lie in the lateral position. I hope everybody already has revised. The INI is done, NEET is coming, so everybody has already revised this test. So when the patient is lying on a lateral position, what we try to do whenever there is an abduction contracture, what will happen? The limb will be slightly abducted. You won't be able to keep it close towards the midline. Let's suppose this is a midline. So you cannot move the thigh towards the midline because of this abductor muscle contracture, right? So this, when you are able to move the thigh close to the midline, that means there is no abduction contraction. If the limb remains like this away from the midline, you cannot make it close to the midline. There is a contracture over here. The iliotibial band is getting contracted. That's what we call Ober's test. So why we are doing it? We are doing it to test for iliotibial band contracture. Please do remember it. Because of the tightness of the iliotibial band, you won't be able to move the thigh towards the midline, right? So abduction contracture, contracture of the iliotibial band, and the name of the test is Ober's test. So we learned Trendelenburg, we learned Gover's, we learned Ober's test, Meron test. These are four tests, important one, out of which three are important for PGME point of view also. So this one, I was telling you about this one that you were asking, dermatomyositis versus polymyositis and DMD. So I told in the very first slide, we might confuse sometime between these two categories of patients, the DMD and the polymyositis. But I would just like to tell, sir, polymyositis is having no genetic inheritance pattern basically. Sex-linked recessive is your DMD, but polymyositis has got nothing. Though in both of them, the muscular weakness will be usually proximal. But sometimes in polymyositis, we can have a change of the pattern, can be distal also. Then facial muscle weakness, as you clearly said, facial muscle weakness can be a part of the dystrophinopathies, but not a part of any of the other muscular dystrophy. That is one very important feature. Talking about the other muscles weakness, not involved in DMDs or the Beckers are usually the muscles of the neck and the back. But in polymyositis, usually these are involved. Patient cannot hold the neck. So this is one common thing, which is one important feature which differentiate these two. Then when you're talking about the dysphagia, it is frequently involving the patients of polymyositis, not a feature of these Duchenne muscular dystrophies. Muscle atrophies because of dystrophin will be severe obviously here, but dystrophin is not involved in any of the other muscular dystrophy. So these are usually mild in other conditions of polymyositis. Skin changes, so dermatomyositis and polymyositis, these usually show you the skin changes, which is more when you call it a dermatomyositis, otherwise less as compared to the polymyositis. But in Duchenne, no skin involvement is usually there. It is only the involvement of muscle. These are important things that I wanted to tell, but one common thing that I want to share, what exactly is similar between these two, the common between these two, that the deep tendon reflex, it is preserved till late in both the conditions. EMG. EMG is the only way which helps us to identify the muscle problem. And it will show you the same feature in both of them, DMD as well as polymyositis. So the only way we have to differentiate these two is the most important thing, involvement of the skin, involvement of the neck and the back muscle, and then involvement, this weakness of the neck and back muscle, as I said, and then the muscular atrophy. So clinical feature will help you to differentiate more as compared to the investigations of EMG or talking about the deep tendon reflexes. This is, sir, one major difference between these two categories. Then next, when you, yeah. So this you can start with this approach to the patient.
So this is actually the recommended approach for a patient who presents to you with the DMD. This is obviously from a pediatric point of view. Sir may give his opinion how they approach DMD patients, but from a pediatric point of view, whenever a child comes with the classical symptoms of a DMD, proximal muscle weakness, and the child has a calf hypertrophy, the pseudo hypertrophy in the calf muscles, plus cardiomyopathy, suppose the child is having. So creatine kinase estimation is very important. And as I told, the creatine kinase is hugely elevated in these cases, often 15 to 35,000, 15,000 to 35,000 is the levels. While in most other type of muscle dystrophies, I think Sir can tell, in most other types of muscle dystrophies, the creatine kinase is only mild to moderately elevated. So it's significantly elevated in patients who have DMDs. So once creatine kinase is elevated, symptoms are there. So it's quite likely that this patient has DMD. So the next thing that you obviously need to do is either think of a muscle biopsy or think of gene analysis. Now, what we normally recommend is gene analysis should be done first. Now, in our case, because obviously there is approachability problems, accessibility problems for gene analysis, not aware. So what we went for first is a muscle biopsy. But the recommended approach is to first go in for a gene analysis first. And in gene analysis, you normally check for the deletion or duplication in the dystrophin gene. That's the most important type of mutation that is present in the dystrophin gene. We have now these PCR analysis and the multiplex PCR analysis, like multiplex ligation dependent probe amplification assays. These are very, very reliable uh, in estimating the copies of these genes, and they can very reliably estimate the deletion and duplication of these genes. So using these, you can find whether there are findings of DMDs or not. Suppose the child does not have those findings. So in this case also, please remember that you should not stop thinking of the diagnosis. The next is to go in for a sequencing of the dystrophin gene, a complete sequencing. Till now, you were checking for the deletion duplication, but now you can go in for a complete sequencing of the dystrophin gene. And in case after the sequencing also, you are still not able to make a diagnosis of DMD, then what they still recommend, remember we started by saying the symptoms were of DMD and the creatine kinase levels were significantly elevated. So do not stop thinking of DMD. In those cases where the sequencing also is negative, in those cases they go in for a muscle biopsy. And in muscle biopsy, by immunocytochemistry methods or immunocytochemistry staining, you can look for this dystrophin protein. And in cases of DMDs, this dystrophin protein is almost absent or is significantly depleted. While in Becker's dystrophy, there is patchy dystrophin. So it is not as significantly depleted as is in cases of DMD. Baki sir can tell what is the orthopedic approach that they follow in such patients.
So broadly speaking, the approach remains same. But to be honest to you, if the patient is very non-affording, for this genetic has got no relation with the poverty of the patient though. But if the patient is not very affording, obviously we tell them to get these done from some government setup or from some other facilities where they can get these investigation done free of cost or some cheaper rates. In private setups, these are very costly investigations. Everybody cannot afford it, right? So we what we theoretically read as well as we have practically seen. So whenever about these investigation, our call is whether you talk about sir creatine kinase. I'll tell you some interesting facts that we usually learn. You might put some light over it. Whether you talk about the creatine kinase or whether you talk about the aldolase, enzyme aldolase or the creatine kinase, there is one very very interesting fact about them, that these two enzymes, they basically are elevated at a very higher level in the pre-symptomatic phase when the child is not very symptomatic. So usually at that time we don't get a check. Probably this was one of the reasons that why you didn't find level of creatine kinase as you are saying to 30-35,000. So these level, I'll just note it down. So level is raised in pre-symptomatic phase and in the pre-symptomatic phase, and as the child becomes symptomatic, when it is seen that as the disease worsens, the level they decreased. So level falls down when disease worsens. This is a very very interesting fact which many people don't know, sir. and it becomes normal when the end stage is there. It almost becomes normal. It almost becomes normal by the end stage of the disease.
So probably because the amount of muscles to degenerate actually have significantly lessened now.
Already, yes, sir. Already they are destroyed by end stage of disease. This is the reason. So probably what you were saying in the initial part that you didn't expect this much of lower creatine kinase, 8,000 only in your patient. You were expecting DMD and you were expecting 33,000. So most likely the pre-symptomatic phase is already over.
That's the reason.
The majority of the muscle bulk is already damaged, and that is why when the disease is worsening now, the parents have got the child to you, and that is the reason creatine kinase is not that raised. So this is the same thing with both the enzymes, the creatine kinase as well as aldolase. This is one interesting point. Second is, sir, LDH as well as the aspartate transaminase that you were saying, they are raised. We also believe that these are very, very non-specific. Though in all the dystrophinopathies we see that they're raised, but these are very non-specific for the muscles. The only way we think that it can be diagnosed is by EMG or by the approach that you have just disclosed. So EMG is a better way to diagnose that muscles are involved, and NCV to just confirm that nerves are not involved. That is our approach. Just to add on the NCV and EMG, we add on to your approach. But the rest of the approach, sir, it remains same, like we have already discussed
So,
here.
sir, if the question comes in the exam, suppose, and
Yeah.
they give a patient who has already creatine kinase levels have been done.
Yes, sir.
So the next approach, if they ask, so before muscle biopsy or EMG, the approach should be to get a gene analysis done.
Yes, sir. Exactly. Best, sir, is always to get a gene analysis done. That is the best investigation.
Because
If
I know there are many students who would possibly answer muscle biopsy as the approach earlier than gene analysis. Because in Indian setup, accessibility issues are always there for such approaches. So,
correct,
for a student's sake, also, you agree that in case a question like this is asked in the exam, gene analysis should be approach prior to muscle biopsy.
correct, sir. I do agree, sir, because gene is defective, and if you are able to catch the gene, diagnosis is already there. So, though non-availability, costing, developing country scenario, these are all the hindrances in getting a gene analysis done. But obviously, gene analysis is the best investigation that I feel is better answer than a muscle biopsy. Before muscle biopsy, we should get it. These are the things that I wanted to just convey that EMG is the better option. Then go for NCV just to confirm that the nerve system is not involved, and that is a feature of these dystrophinopathies, the DMD or the Beckers. So that is what I wanted to add on to your approach, sir. Okay. So these are the this is the table that I've just put here, just for the comparison purpose of all these muscular dystrophies. But to be honest, that these are the two commonest, Duchenne and the Becker, that we
Yes,
have been discussing
definitely.
again and again. So Emery, I have given the reason why it is known as Emery-Dreyfus because of the absence of the protein emerin. So limb girdle because girdle muscles are involved, and facioscapulohumeral because those set of muscles are involved. That is how the names have been given for all these muscular dystrophies. So if I, sir, you have already told us that DMD is more common as compared to the Beckers, and how to clinically differentiate between these two, we have already discussed that. But certain differences through this table, I want to put in between these two muscular dystrophies. So one common thing between them is that both have the dystrophin defect. But as you have already mentioned, Duchenne is more common as Becker's. So my first preference, my first diagnosis, differential will always be a Duchenne as compared to Becker. One important thing is that usually in Becker's, which you already mentioned out, pointed out, sir, in Becker's the symptoms start late. So we have seen, as per our orthopedic textbooks, that usually it is after the 7 years of age we see the problems onset of the Becker's. You can usually start before 3, and the patient will be presenting to you somewhere around 6-7 years after 3 years of age, basically. Like your patient presented at the age of 7 to 8 years of age. One difference in both of them, the similarity, rest of the things are already similar, like proximal muscle weakness, gene involvement, they are X-linked recession. This is all same. Only difference that we can talk about is that this IQ level that you pointed out, the intellectual level, this intellectual level between the two, Duquesne and the Becker, it is commonly decreased, like you have mentioned. But in Becker's, we don't read that it is decreased, the IQ level. It might be hindered in Duquesne, but not in Becker's. That is one major difference. Rest of the things that they remain same, that gestures soleus, like these are common muscle to be involved in both of them. Pseudo hypertrophy will be seen in both of them. scoliosis, kyphoscoliosis. These are all because of the muscular imbalances. So these are all the common things. What is different is the age, the presentation, and the intellectual level. That is how you can differentiate between these two common dystrophin of both of them occurring because of dystrophin. Over to you, sir.
So the treatment of DMD, again, this is a treatment which we normally do in consultation with orthopedicians because they are the people who are masters of this disorder. But usually as pediatricians, what we normally start and what we normally know is that the only known treatment which can probably slightly increase the mobility and probably decrease the time by which or probably increase the time, I'm sorry, by which the child can become totally non-mobile is glucocorticoids. That's the only known. Otherwise, this is a disease which, as this is a disease which actually has no cure. So this is a progressive disease. Deaths usually occur by about 20 years of age. The glucocorticoids that we normally recommend is prednisolone and dexamethasone. I think dexamethasone is the approved corticosteroid for these cases, but I mean, you will tell better. The dose of prednisolone we normally recommend is 0.75 milligrams per kg per day, or dexamethasone 0.9 milligrams per kg per day. The important question which is being asked, I think, also in one of the MCQs is, what is the time to start glucocorticoids in these cases? Now, in Nelson's textbook of pediatrics, they have written the time to start glucocorticoids usually is the time when the development of the child starts to plateau or the regression of the milestones they start. For example, the child had been growing till a certain age. So the child, as I told you, initially appeared absolutely normal and there was no abnormality that the mothers could detect. But after a certain period of time, after, for example, the child started sitting, the child started standing, the child started walking, after a certain time, then the regression of the milestone starts. That means after a certain time, say 2 to 3 years of age, while I told you, while walking, the child now starts falling down. Then with proximal muscle weakness progressing, there will come a time when gradually the child sitting will also become difficult. So the time this regression of milestone starts, which usually in books is written around 4 to 6 years of age, that is usually the time glucocorticoids should be started. So either when the development plateaus or when the regression of milestone starts, that's the time glucocorticoids should be started. Regarding cardiac care, again, cardiomyopathy, I told you, is a very important feature. So ACE inhibitors, angiotensin receptor blockers, even aldosterone receptor antagonists such as eplerenone can be started in these cases. But again, the question is, when should it be started? So it should be started usually according to books. Again, there is a great degree of ambiguity regarding what is the exact timing when they should be started. But these agents should be started in a patient of cardiomyopathy when the left ventricular ejection fraction is less than 55%. Now, one thing that I would like to specifically point out here is that in case a question is asked here on DMD and they asked about the cardiomyopathy and the best investigation for a cardiomyopathy. So please remember, normally we say many times echocardiogram is the most approachable, the most accessible, and probably one of the first approaches that should be followed. Now, what we know is that cardiac MRI is known to give earlier findings of myocardial fibrosis. So those findings of myocardial fibrosis, which are actually not seen in echocardiogram early, those can be found out by cardiac MRIs. So according to me, it is very clear that cardiac MRI should always be the first investigation approach for identifying cardiomyopathies in these patients. But obviously, echocardiogram and ECGs should also be done so that you are able to find out the extent of the severity of cardiac problems in these cases. And I've already told, when the ejection fraction is less than 55%, that's the time when you start these drugs in these cases. Other than this physical rehabilitation, well, these mutation skip therapies, these are new agents that have recently been, I think eteplirsen is the most recently approved agent. It actually is exon 51 skipping oligonucleotide approach, which can skip the defective exons, and hence it can correct the reading frame. So by correcting the reading frame, it will make the protein functional. As far as I know, the concentration of the protein, the amount of protein will not be normal, but whatever protein is being produced will be a functional protein. So this is a major landmark which has been approved. Intravenous weekly infusions of eteplirsen. Very recently, we have heard its price is a huge price. but weekly intravenous infusions of eteplirsen can to some extent prolong the child's life expectancy and can improve to some extent the prognosis. Otherwise, it's a dismal prognosis for these cases. Atalurin also again is a new therapy, but the most recent approved therapy is eteplirsen. Other than this, physical rehabilitations, chest physiotherapies, uh, I mean, most of this is a multi-systemic approach where orthopedicians, physiotherapists, they have to be involved so that the child life expectancy, at least to some extent, can be prolonged. Baki, over to you, sir.
Correct, sir. We agree to that, sir. As per we read about the use of steroid in these conditions, our studies, our paper, our literatures that we read, they say that when you have given the steroids, these cannot stop the progression of the disease, but yes, they delay the problems that the child might be having. Main problem with these children, the DMDs, the Becker, is that the child becomes non-ambulatory by after certain age, and more common in DMDs. These steroids given, the prednisolone given, now what it does, the paper shows that when the steroids are given, they have delayed the this phase of non-ambulation by at least 3 to 4 years. The child has been able to work for more than 3 to 4 years if these have been started early, like you mentioned. Sir, other to be very straightforward, there is no treatment, there is no specific treatment as such available. Gene therapy is one that can be tried. Steroids are one, and other than that, we have got symptomatic measures only. We have to take care of the muscles which are undergoing fibrosis, which are undergoing contractures, and then doing the regular physiotherapy so that contractures don't develop. Use of the braces to prevent the deformities, and it is a multidisciplinary approach, not only the orthopedics or the pediatrics, but involving the neurology people, involving the cardiology people, involving the pulmonology people, nutritional people, the diet and all. And then obviously the care of the patient in the bed, the physical therapist. And so basically all the purpose, the goal is to, provide the child with more of the mobilization and more of the functioning as much as they can do, because once they are onto the bed, once they stop doing the activities, the life expectancy automatically goes down because of multiple factors: low immunity, low movement, and low, multiple things. So life expectancy automatically decreases. So this is a multidisciplinary team approach. Unfortunately, the prognosis overall is very, very poor. We all know that. So I think, sir, that is all I have to say from the treatment point of view from my side about these muscle dystrophies. So I think, sir, we are done with the muscular dystrophies. I think the students would be now able to make out what exactly the dystrophinopathies means, what exactly the muscular dystrophies means, how you have to broadly see the patients in your OPD, how to basically approach, certain MCQs like the clinical tests we discussed are a part of are the part of PGME examination. You told the approach also. You told certain about the cardiac MRI also. So that is something I think which is important, and they should be knowing that as a part of recent advancement, we have got new therapies also. So let's hope someday we have some good treatment for these kids, these children, and we can improvise upon the prognosis part.
Sure, sir.
Yeah. So I think, sir, that is all we have from this.
Definitely, sir. Thank you very much, sir. It was a privilege for me also. I mean, there are so many things that I learned. For example, I was about to interrupt you at that time, but I did not interrupt you. But one of the major things that I learned, why the findings of creatine kinase was not that high in our patient. So now I understood why the findings. So there are so many things that I also learned during this session with you. It was a great session, sir, for me also. And I'm sure the students had a lot to learn from the session.
Yes, sir, and whatever queries they are putting, definitely we can answer. And I do believe, sir, there are so many integrated things which a student has to know from not only the theoretical point of view, but from the practical point as well as from the PGME point of view, and from the small topic which usually everybody skips. We
Skips,
have seen that
definitely.
there were so many questions that we can make out for the PGME exam also. The
Definitely.
test and the laboratory evaluations, the relevances and all. So I think everybody will be utilizing this lecture to the maximum, uh, you know, to get the benefit out of it.
Definitely, sir.
So
Thank
it
you very
was
much,
very
sir.
nice
Thanks a
having
lot.
you with us, sir. Thank you so much for
Same here,
this
sir.
session.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, everyone, watching us for this particular session. And please put down your points that you want to know. Put up your ideas. Put up your points that you want to tell us to provide you more and more things like this. So I hope you will just like it and you will just utilize it to the maximum. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.